Welcome everybody to the last time until a certain period of education or study evolves from a new chapter or a new dynamic in my study. Of course, the one that found me where I am today is of much importance. It really excites me to try and emphasize and really elaborate on. It's got me to the point where, of course, it's been a very slow but very difficult, if let's say formidable, transition between previous documents or time signatures to that effect. Of course, I don't really tend to keep at pace with how I'm doing physically, mentally, but of course, of a productive sense, the search for things weird and wonderful never stops people achieving great things. And of course, as strange as it may seem, it's been a little bit taxing. It's not exactly been fundamentally sound for the entire world, let alone myself. So we'll start very much at this state that I'm at today by just completely sort of submerging in that in which hasn't really tickled my fancy to really itemize or isolate even, because the world has got many priorities. I haven't been there. But I've certainly been caught up in it like everybody. So here today in September 2018, I'd really like to at least acknowledge that we have a lot of people in this world that are really doing it tough. From a personal area of value or a personal level of, expectation in the world, it's difficult to assess from my standpoint. In opposed to the rest of the world, we have a very dangerous and uncertain world. But of course, how we control ourselves, even fear-based adrenaline, things like that which sort of keeps us poised and keeps us readily accessible through our competencies, our skills, and that in which we attribute to the world, is always key. What's the old saying? If you don't look after yourself, you're sort of no good to anyone. If you're no good to yourself, you're really no good to anyone. So let's start now. And I want to title this one, and of course this is so key and critical to my thinking, because for the time that I have sort of kept away from a constant tally or a constant, description, even to my greater senses, of what really excites me to want to further enhance or magnify in my quest to become a doctor in a lot of cases, is the law of gravity. If I said law of attraction, I might have sort of been really careful in which to say so, but of course the law of gravity, right? We have gravity, and of course, if I was to start now in a scientific realm, put people into a perspective and suggest that, like we describe gravity, we're looking for the forces of nature and all of the astronomical calculations in which to sort of work with us. Of course, we will take that as a human race, as a civilization, and really bring it to a classic case of peril, won't we? Because we will build a case and mount a case. In any area of scientific study, the evaluations and of course the estimates in which people are building in a world like this has dragged me to a point where, just like where I'm talking to you today, does tend to, it's a soul discovery as to why you must always punctuate, and you must always really, you must provide gravity to a situation. Understanding the gravity, we will bring it to a point of destruction, like build a case and have the whole world attracted to it. Gravity and attraction has a very detrimental prospectus at stake. It's like that with the influences in the world. So let me start by putting a couple of fresh perspectives into the categorical, the time we're here. We'll just call it ministry for whatever, because I tend to like to use that formal degree of approach. Attraction leads to possession, doesn't it? To some respect, you possess what you are attracted to. There's a way in which, like, before you formulate things, you are very sensitive in which to, transpire, to sort of, connect with. The two becomes one thing, and you work alongside it, or you work with it. The whole world, sort of through symmetry, tends to look at things like a transaction, just like that, where two become one. You look to formulate the world through good business practices / ventures. The entire sort of productivity that says sell one, sell a million, but of course, without sort of being able to put two things together, it makes it difficult even with the symmetry of the walking, talking human being. So attraction leads to possession. Possession leads to antagony. Digital antagony, where we say, if I was to say, antagonal flare. We'll talk about shapes like in geometric scales of thinking. We don't tend to think of the antagony. Now, the old saying, the truth is antagonizing. We develop things to our peril. We'll build a case. We'll tend to go way out there with things and fail to establish the gravity of a situation. See, gravity is like saying we're all born with gravity. So be careful as to what you sort of contribute to a world where, we're all on a sort of even playing field, if not an even keel, even before we start to modify the sequences or the codes. The gravity itself is like what we're born with. It is sort of our adversary. I am actually here in this present space talking about things more on a human level, a behavioral standard of upkeep and maintenance in a person's life. And so therefore being able to get things simply right or perfectly complement, let's just say, gravity or each forward step, that in which you occupying somebody else's time, money, energy, resources, manpower, intelligence, productivity is just like the space, like that Doppler effect of where something had become, decisive in which to do so. We tend to understand that, like that in which we, personalize for people's lives, takes away the gravity from a circumstance or a situation, and we'll even indict the whole galaxy, curse the wind, karma, just karma everything, tell everybody they're going to hell or something. Like if you were to paint a picture, if you wanted sympathy, you wouldn't want to paint a picture too bright for sympathy, knowing full well that darkness actually rules those sympathizing. Darkness tends to be that in which you can't sort of modify the sequences to understand what kind of day people are having. But even you would fight to get up on your own 2 feet. Gravity is very much the law. You fight to get up on your own 2 feet like a plane fights gravity to keep itself up. It wouldn't matter what the unblemished costs were in which to continue well within the scale of possession, possessing and holding on to that which is yours. So vice versa, you think about obsession. So if you're sort of obsessed in something, that leads to your conviction. You say attraction leads to possession. Well, think about it. Obsession leads to conviction. Because when you're possessing something, you might talk about possession. Possession charges, or possession is 9/10 of the law. Obsession leads to possession. No. Possession leads to digital antagony. Obsession leads to conviction. Conviction leads to your pathogen, your pathology. Gravity in opposed to gratuity or being grateful or just great, gracious, like grace, like lawful abode. The gravity of a household, the gravity of a circumstance, the gravity of that in which you are lawfully responsible for. It's like that with your own walking, talking, 2 feet and a heartbeat. It's like that in which to negotiate things perfectly well without getting too far ahead of yourself. Things that, laws that attract you or things that attract a person might bear upon the negative. It can be an impulse-based bargaining strategy that is actually compiled against one's gravity. You know, you always say that you don't accept anything from anyone. Sometimes even the only person you can trust is a perfect stranger because of a lack of gratitude or a lack of anything. Like possession be 9/10 of the law, you're constantly being robbed. You're being robbed of even, having of looking attractable. We face that with partnerships, but of course just the way in which that sound quality or that sound favor or impartation, you'd like to tend to think we're all born with in any given situation, governing that to our greater dependency. We have a scope on things where security is one thing, but stability is another. It's security when you invest in a car, you provide security. Security and stability are 2 totally different things because stabilizing factors means that, like stability, you have to be able to drive the car, hold on to it with your 2 hands. Attraction leads to possession, like the attraction of buying a brand new vehicle, knowing damn well that you have to very much be in perfect possession of it. You would like to retain possession, and legally you are more than entitled to, so long as you abide by the law. And like even the traffic laws bear 9/10 of all possible infringements or liabilities at the stake and claim of anything convictable, or that which can be convicted, to anything that occurs. So if we were to say that was the same thing with advance or advantage, then we have a different concept, bargaining strategy. We have advancements or advance, in opposed to advantage. Like vantage point in a world like this, we're born into the world with nothing. We're all born with gravity though. We're all sort of born with that in which humans are not as beneficial of anything unless it sort of coincides with that, the pre-existing condition of which requires more restoration and a peaceful negotiation, so that you're not compromising the foundation or compromising that in which might already be in a unstable condition, because we're not supposed to sort of understand that. Advance, where we make an advance on people, from what advantage? We get advances in also our behavioral conduct, our behavioral negotiations. Remedies are hard to come by. Scientifically, we're sort of responsible for that in which what we are given to multiply against that in which you talk about the range factor. But of course, like an advantage in life, a lot of disadvantaged people. And from what vantage point do you make an advance on somebody or any one thing and not keep them intact? Sort of like we're born into a world that relies on the strength of individuals to keep it together and to show a moral agency in which to build the character of integrity, albeit sole dependency or sole description. Whereas at the same time, we're born into a world that relies so heavily on others, and like the individual walking, talking example, like that of how you boost and bolster your ability, which provides much greater advantage in life, right? Doesn't just sort of allow you to advance, that's minimalized through circumstances and things that, just like gravity, I suppose, attract people to what greater benefit. It fortifies the sequences. So therefore, we only really have an ability in life to see things as what we have rather than what we sort of step into. we need to step into that in which is rightfully ours. All the positively bearing effects that we have on each other is just like the bearings in a car or in tires or something. The bearing that you have on your own joints and the ability in which to say it's, provides just like all of the above, that which I just spoke. But no, it does, because we sort of see, the elements of priority of being optimistic or open to that in which we're not going too far ahead of ourselves. We're not building a case that's going to prioritize, a cessation of some sort. It's very much got to be kept within the perspective. The perspective that sort of draw upon little, have faith in a lot, sees us in the art forms, in art waves of many forms, wavelengths, as much as links, wavelengths, start with light colors, but then slowly, but surely build upon stronger, more well-defined and, intricate, but yet articulated outcomes. So that, of course, if we were sort of perfecting what we were doing, we have something greater to achieve than just the basis of conformity. We want to conform to being perfect. Perfect is sort of half of what we can achieve, knowing that the lettering of the law sort of says that precision is greater than perfection. Perfect, like on a bullseye, you hit bullseye, that's perfect. You do something perfect, you achieve it through gymnastics, you achieve it through that in which you perfectly negotiate something. You think that people aren't perfect? A lot of people are perfect. You really got to be, you got to be satisfied as much as that's the standard. That's gravity. You sort of want to strive to perfection, and it's not a great big a deal. It's not a great big accomplishment. Are we all perfect? Well, it depends. If you practice, it's one thing to say practice makes perfect, but look, perfect practice makes perfect. I'm pretty sure we can establish that. So therefore, we keep things positively aligned to that in which we expect to sort of reap the full benefit from, or bear the outcome. Like, say, we filter out the bad, we infiltrate the good, we fix the wrongs, but we stick with the rights, and everything's sort of kept within, let's say, a positive incline. Those kinds of things provide optimism for the future, providing people a greater advantage. Attention span equals attention span. And it's like that when you see, especially little kids, anybody's happy to learn things. If you're not sort of happy when you're learning, you don't really want to learn stuff, your head will be down or something. But opening up people's optimisms and their eyes and their attention spans to things really provides an attraction of some sorts, and it's opening up their attention span, especially when you see people smile. And when people smile, you sort of pretty much know that their attention span is really, really switched on. It can be a positive thing. Don't try to take the negative out of everything and take the positive and completely ratify, but of course, establish every something. There's what goes up must come down. Don't forget where you come from. It certainly does have that bearing effect, like yang yin thing, but not, of course, that's just one way. We know what it's like. The same way symmetry plays a major key role in that in which we, we have a hadron collider, and you say it puts the law of symmetry into hospital. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't, because like kaleidoscopic views or scopes on things, people have a handicap. And you know what that handicap tends to be in worlds like this? People that work in the forensic departments for the governments of our world, the greatest governments, and the number one department, the research department, being a forensic scientist, even one with a scientific degree, they've got a pair of glasses on. They've got a pair of glasses which sort of like, compared to qualification, or just simply being perfectly fit or perfectly qualified in a world like this, bears the fact that they have a handicap. They sort of do have a handicap when they're staring through a pair of contact lenses or prescription glasses then looking through a microscope, then looking through a computer, and then sort of having a support staff around them, which they pass on their analysis and their spreadsheet documentations, which of course they provide a lot. Doesn't it sort of provide a itinerant shortfall in so many of these areas where I'm not going to say that it's to that effect, greater to that effect, where the negative, if it be like the absolute, has an overbearing effect on industry, department, agency, in opposed to that which, we just minimalize through individual classification. It's like having a handicap of 17 playing on a US PGA golf tour, knowing full well that you don't qualify. You sort of don't qualify at all unless you have a handicap of 0 in golf. No handicap. And it's right there. So it does impede upon the natural conception rate in which, like the perspective put in front of people's framework and those accredited fieldworks in which requires specification, you'd like to think that, this world has too many goddamn estimates that are relinquished upon fear. We're not sticking to the trunk and staying away from the twigs. But we have to. We are losing base conformity. We're losing our conformist right in a world like this by too many reformist policies. Saying reform, reform, reform. Reform from what? As if to say it had a negative bearing effect on the advances of our world? I wonder why. If it was the only generation that was ever mollycoddled and pampered like teachers' pets, or a classification of exceptional growth and development in all of 200 years since the Industrial Revolution began. Well, that would speak for itself, because we've just got too many pets. Too many teachers' pets, but at the same time, too many special kids or special someone's children. A lot of people give birth to, undergraduates, and they're an exceptionally well-off family in a corporate world or a royal world, a royal sense, hierarchy, diplomatic pardon, and privilege. But yet, whilst that's the case, they're entitled, like everybody else. But never have we seen so many special cases of special people with special learning difficulties. Why is that the case? Because you were sort of, in part, becoming more sound through impartation of somebody else's lawful abode, in opposed to that in which, like a conformist right, but a conformist belief, we have sort of, we've had to compare things like integration to campaigning. And there's nothing really good about integrated sciences, if it only meant that you're sort of trying to bear upon the pre-existent infrastructure, which is where all innovation comes from. Taking that base, taking that foundation and the gravity and building upon it. Knowing full well that sort of when we negotiate the straps and the traps of things, right, traps and straps, we have to sort of retain the good use of everything we have. Like the good use of what? Perfect qualification or the integrity factor? Not to say that you get away with it because you are a diplomatic someone, or just recommended this way or that way. Peter Dutton's been brought into that case here in the country of Australia, in relation to friends that he might have promoted. But I think that that's sort of, it's obsolete, because of course those positions don't necessarily have a bearing effect upon that in which you would suggest, which other people are constantly fueling the guts out of, one in which provides a consistent but most defined conformist role of 24/7, an area of life where it's not obsolete, in which to sort of think so. It has a concurring element to it. Concurring, it's not incurring any major issue, like the way in which you talk about people's entitlements for governments to pay each and every transaction through transaction terminals for their front bench employees or anybody under the government's priority, because of course you don't want them making payments or transactions outside of the government's perfect account. So a lot of cases, government MPs, ministers, people attached to the greatest levels and branches of our multifaceted powerhouses like the government should always be able to perfectly retain their position in opposed to where I'm saying got a handicap here or can't see properly. Forensic analysis and science is in fact a totally different thing. Security and stability are two totally different things, but don't take for granted what system of government is to be in fact that basis, that foundation, the gravity in which we all have to keep it, peacefully negotiate, but negotiate it well, strong, confidently, not to be weakened or compromised by that in which says it just attracts people because they're so possessive to want to not even give you a feet of space, while they sort of smother you and expect you to even defend why you might smell a little bit or this, that, and whatever. It doesn't tend to carry the workload of a world that puts up with everybody's, fraught estimates. They overestimate. They're looking to provide something, but then through overestimates, right? They're trying to get too much of a percentage of it out of for themselves, not through people, but through those little splinters that you see in other people's eyes, in opposed to the plank in which you negotiate yourself. Other people's splinters might be your plank, but then of course, if you're not taking everything 100%, for starters, you don't just sort of do things once, you do it twice, do it 3 times, you should pretty much rule out what's negative or positive. So therefore, we know that we have a candid responsibility in which to provide a modified circumstance that provides that basis, that conformity. The sequences at play tend to sort of spell out those little niggling percentages, or people trying to overestimate. Estimates are not evaluations, and believe me, evaluations and estimates do not lead to the approximation or the proximeter. You know where something is, you can always account for it. That's why governments tend to pick up the transaction through any transaction terminal or account off the government's ledger to provide perfect ledger, accountability, and terminal transaction so that they're not making transactions outside of their own control or ledger. If it meant that it was $99 for a domestic flight or $8,000 for this, I'm not getting into that, $23,000 for this or $3,000 in a formal bottle of wine or whatever. They have to be accounted for 24/7. You overlook the mark that these are 24/7 people. So regardless of how you think their role or how free they are to sort of negotiate everything, think again. If it just meant over a little bit of money or this and that or a little bit of incentive to have a holiday or a flight, then you people are grossly misconceiving the pathogen. The pathogen like antagonal flare, and you people have actually done it. The truth is antagonizing, you sort of done it to yourself because it's walking, talking truth. It is gravity, it is the symmetry at hand, symmetry at play. The conformist view that says it's not easy being an individual walking, talking someone, but to an area of qualitativeness, it's not necessarily having to be so perfect that everything's beautiful. If I may say it, the shitty gig in this world even sees people ban mouth coverings like people that don't need eye coverings, but people keep spitting in their eyeballs and they've got irritable build-up because they're spitting in their eyeballs, being in their space. They'll spit in your mouth. You'll get the flus, things like that. And this is a constant repetition where you cannot even regulate. Physical regulation. Physically regulating is as much as important in this world as digestion. And it's like that with our senses, our sciences. There's no science without math. There's no dollars without cents. But like, how can you stand without a flaw? And like a world that is just governed by flaws and faults, okay, we all have our flaws, we all have circumstances, what have you. But if you formulate farcical whirlpools of abuse, these are like thought bubbles people formulate, and they tend to live in it. They're not living in or on the surface plateau where the estimates were always at concern. Not going too far ahead to take it into an astronomical proportion that sort of builds you a case and then takes everything to be quagmire, to be unrenderable through surfaces which you say like being able to fix anything or restore something. It's not like carrying the shit or carrying the weather and other people's mess everywhere we go. We are not human when we're talking about having to fix clothes. The only effective treatment is to literally put it into an incinerator and burn these things. It's not to say it's got louse or typhus or something. It just is like the elements, those elements at play that always favour the brave implication, whether we like to accept those traditional aspects that have always stood well by us, because even if we like to have something to do about it or have something to affect it, like the law of gravity, this is the world in which we negotiate. Love is not unconditional. Love is very much conditional, ladies and gentlemen. It's conditional because, like personal friends and family, immediate family and friends or people, right? You've got your life ahead of you now. You're a 20, 30, 40 something year old. It wouldn't matter how old you are. But once you're established, it's very conditional to do things for people that are immediate, like family, friends, things like that, because you expect more out of them. You expect by helping them get up on their feet. At the same time, you expect to get them sort of, adjusted to a circumstance which requires a bit of love. It requires conditions, like conditioning yourself. If you thought it was unconditional, you've got another thing coming. Hope itself is what we call unconditional. Do you understand? Because love is very much conditional. Hope is unconditional. Under no conditions whatsoever, nothing, no reservations. It's always hope. You've got to have hope, unconditional hope. The world doesn't start falling apart because of things in the past. If you're very much here right now, your past is on a mistake, you're very much with us. Things start to fall apart when you don't have things in the future. So hope is very much unconditional. You have to be able to reparate and fix things where you can. Love, on the other hand, is what we call uncompromising. And that's what it's like when we have conditions, when we help people. It's of conditions. It can be for their own good. And it's not really considerable to accept their ways that brought them to that, because, of course, they require straightening. They require conditions that is uncompromising to bring about that in which provides greater advantage and the advancement of their pure, but let's say, like the indicators in life, their authentic someone. Not because it was the love and support and affection you got from around you. There probably wasn't even that whilst you were healing or being put back on the straight and narrow or the pathway or something like that. But of course it was enough to sort of redefine where those bug-bearing elements had to sort of, and those niggling elements or whatever, ailments, had to sort of be readdressed and sort of, filter out the bad, infiltrate the goods, fix the wrongs, stick with the rights, and sort of get it somewhere on the natural incline, the more positive incline. So therefore, like faith, the Bible does talk about that scientifically. Gravity of a world like this, it's very much sound impartation and of lawful abode to understand that if love was uncompromising, and you know now that it is, if you believe that love is uncompromising, believe me, love is uncompromising, but you've got to learn to fall before you pick yourself up. Otherwise, what is it to face consequence in this world and govern the world and have diplomatic pardon and privilege? That's the unwavering balance that's tend to having the biggest bug-bearing effect in our world anyway. And we need to address that in a world to provide greater stability for people in all their negotiations. And if hope is unconditional, because you absolutely got to have hope up, then faith is what we call unconquerable. Because when you have faith in something, it's amazing when you actually get faith in something. It's the missing dimension where faith is very difficult to assess until you sort of have it. When you have faith in something, it's like, I think that's going to win. I think that horse, I think that sporting competitor is going to win. I've sort of got faith in my team. I've got faith in what I'm doing, our projects, this in which we're working really hard for. You've got faith in it. It's not really love. It can be loving because it's uncompromising that you sort of stick with it. But that faith is where you get to a point where if you've got faith, then you have to perfect faith. And if you only sort of perfect that faith, that's when it becomes inconquerable, because when you're always faithful, it's like saying you're saved by grace because you're a sinner, or saved by grace because you have lawful abode, you are doing the right thing, you are responsible for your actions, in opposed to not taking law into your own hands. That's the difference there. There's no such thing. You can take responsibility into your own hands. That's the difference there. And you have a responsibility in which to provide, the straight path analysis, and not take it too far from that, in which provided the pathway of assurancy and any attraction that sort of stemmed from one point to, a climax of some sort, or a clarification to many respects. You, in fact, find that you have subscripted or subscribed a condition of imprint. And like gravity, a condition of imprint. Think about it. The walking, talking, the straight path, the positive incline, the symmetry, the condition of imprint that builds and builds and builds from one point. You wouldn't put anything in front of you, let alone a flagpole conversation or a building or any infrastructure, to look at it and say, I have faith that I can capitalize and I can absolutely fortify through the strengths in which I'm building for myself, say faith building, but of course, like individuals and everything included, the foundation, the basis of conformity is not to be compromised. You say, it's unfortunate the world has to miss out, but this is half the key. It's not immoral to do so. To talk about the moral agency in which is to build character, people are too busy looking for rogue sponsorship by the numbers, in departments, in their private consortiums and corporations. It doesn't tend to provide the methodology in which you thought was so readily strong and available for you from the point of impact, like bravely implicating or involving anything: time, money, energy, resources, manpower, intelligence, productivity, the works. Right? Because convention speaks for itself. The law of gravity, who are you kidding when it comes to convention? You have to build the foundation. There's no sexist element to it. There's no goodness gracious. You're still requiring the will of God. You're still requiring the will of conformity. Your sanctification is key. And everything that we tend to modify through sequences, you might say motivation is the key to success. It sounds wonderful. It sounds brilliant. You can be motivated. You can be motivated well ahead of time. But you have to be punctual. So in fact, punctuality is the key to success, because you've got to sort of show up to work and work. Everything working in order to be successful, even for promotion, for anything. So you can be saved, got a job, got married, everything's great. But you have to be saved and called. You have to be called to do anything in life according to the good works and purposes. People might say, look, it won't be just good works that save you. Well, that's rather discouraging to a young child or anyone of any age who's still learning. If you say that that no embodiment, or no embodiment at all, no embodiment, no corporation is any wiser by accepting that, everything we do is to have a formal description in which to constant. You can't teach theory with conviction, because people will damn well know when you have no conviction, the obsessions of our heart leading to conviction, which provides the sort of pathogen in everything we look back on, scouring through the facts or raking through the facts. Like the elements, we don't take things out of context, but we do keep it within convention. And that's what it is to guard the conformity, but build it upon that in which we don't stumble, we don't fall. We have faith, unwavering, inconquerable faith. Because no matter what, the gravity is called tolerance. We've got to tolerate it. And tolerance provides every means of assurance when even if we get things wrong, there's no fork in the road. It keeps everything within guidelines. This is the problem with gravity in opposed to attraction. Kids don't think that, kids want to do everything. But if you don't keep people within guidelines, anything within the lines like traffic holding onto a car, then you understand what the gravity of a situation is, the lawful abode. The greatest synergy is that of lawful abode. 24/7 revolution of a planet is to be kept separate from that in which we conform through civilization and through industrial revolution. We are an evolving life form for that in which we provide advantage for each other. It should not be seen as a privilege as much as a pardoning factor. We have to be more civil and jurisdict in which to understand civil jurisdict. You'll never find equality unless you have liberty at the very top. Mercy triumphs over judgment, but you have to have judgment at the very top. We are not equal if it means I am an expert, but you are a support staff member. You don't send a helicopter to do a jet's job or a jet to do a helicopter's job. There's very much promotion. There's very much levels in which to reach, and you ought to be proud of your achievements. Be proud and less prideful. Prideful relates to the numbers. Proud is like an individual soul recognition through accredited fieldworks and those specifications which you would like to accept as your very own, something that ought not to be tweaked or taken out or watered down to assess through grade level assessment outside of the control in which your life operates, like the coincidence meets the confidentiality factor, and yet that's just like, it sounds either like some third-party insurance where they're not really qualified to do so, or even obstacles and obstructions in the industries and the market era where they provide these kinds of obituaries or whatever, and it fashions to their advantage in which to claim they're an expert, but really they're just an industry blocker. You can look at it through dimensions of thought and process, but like the gravity, it's like saying that ultimately, that if we don't sort of compromise, things like, how do you say it? The definitions in which we've put before each other these days. And of course, how do we sort of render the truth if you don't sort of perform a rendition? We put up with all kinds of conditions. We put up with all kinds of circumstances, and you wouldn't even know for the life of it. You just sort of point to the obvious. And you will assume that the obvious is that in which people ought to formulate, like flagpole conversations. It becomes a kind of forgery, doesn't it? Narcissism is like that. Narcissism does not provide the gravity of a situation at all costs. It's like a beehive mind of mediocrity, and you wonder what sort of become drone or android to the fact, So if I was to say to that scale of reference that people forge too much in this life and they're not necessarily fortifying, then let's say like loaded weapons of war. Loaded weapons of war have fortificational purposes, but they're not fortified if they're loaded, are they? No, they're not. You provide adequate space and the time will work itself out. Time is the healer of all wounds. We say, what's the mystery of time? It's pretty simple. We've got too many seconds ahead of time. We can take the same slow effect with time and measure it down, measure it different. Like 2 seconds for every 5 on a clock still sort of brings it back to the 1440 minutes. I suppose it's like saying, if you take 86,400 seconds in a day and you sort of times it to some effect, it brought itself back to 60 or 1440, 24 times 60. But if you took like 34,560, which is like 2 seconds for every 5, people are trying to beat each other by the clock because they put too many ticks where tock should be. It's all tock. Tick is just every second step of the way to assure the guy that invented the clock that it's got a constant sort of a repetition at stake or imparting. So it's all tock, tock, tock. If there was 2 seconds for every 5, we would have more time in which to get things perfectly done through patience, through that in which according to do so provides much more gravity and less sort of haste and weary responsibility to get things done, is like saying that you're too busy beating people by way of default and failing them because you don't provide them adequate space and time within the current time frame, within the current framework. You're very much hurrying people along, and you're not just sort of busy conforming to that which requires, like the tortoise and the hare thing. If you're too fast, you'll get beaten by the tortoise in the end if you sort of burn fast. So it'll bring itself back to 60 of some sort. It's just a question of being able to say, is it worth, desensitizing through even tax measures where that exhausts us and it compromises the basis of conformity. That's pretty critical for all sake. So just quickly here, time and space. Time-space continuum or space-time continuum. And I'll finish this because like gravity and like attraction, well, people talk about sex and devotion, right? And they talk about love and affection. People need to take the time to heal, and humans do heal. Circumstantially, it might look revolting. Person might be undergoing circumstances outside of their natural benefit in which to achieve things for themselves, which limits the amount of crap that they wear and the amount of heavy-laden burdens that continue to mount upon their personal private space and whatnot. So if you're not good to yourself, you're not good to anyone, you really aspire to be, sex and devotion, love and affection, if you're not concentrating on that, you might sort of bank everything on love and affection or sex and devotion.